Good morning. My name is Jay Becker, and I'm a member of the Chicago chapter of the World Can't Wait, a national resistance movement to stop the crimes of our government. Thank you for joining us this morning. As people who are indeed voices of conscience, refute the claims made by President Obama again last night that a bombing campaign against Syria would serve any humanitarian purpose whatsoever and is not, in fact, a supreme violation of international law. I want to thank Grace Place for generously hosting this press conference, and I also want to thank CAN TV in particular for cable casting and streaming this press conference, as so many people more can see it live as questions of war and more war are posed to us again. It may be that our protests, the almost complete lack of support from any country other than Saudi Arabia, and intense disagreement at the top of the government about what action will give the U.S. credibility have delayed Obama's plan to strike Syria with missiles, or not. In international diplomacy, as we learned from Cablegate, thanks to Chelsea Manning, duplicity and lies are the currency. Dr. Timuel Black, renowned chronicler of Black Chicago and author of the trilogy Bridges of Memory, and Standish E. Willis of the National Conference of Black Lawyers and Black People Against Torture, both send their regrets that they cannot join us personally today due to prior commitments. But I am happy to introduce our speakers who were able to come at such short notice. First is Dr. Theodore Jennings, a professor of biblical and philosophical theology at Chicago Theological Seminary. He is the author of 20 books, some of which have been translated into Portuguese, Spanish, Korean, and Japanese. He lectures widely in the US, Latin America, and Asia on issues of justice and inclusion from a theological perspective, and he is an ordained minister of the United Methodist Church. Dr. Jennings?
I'm honored to be asked by my friends in the World Can't Wait to join with them in opposing the use of military force in Syria. I do believe that Assad and his ruling group are very likely guilty of war crimes and crimes against humanity. I also believe that some of his opponents are also guilty. These crimes should never be condoned wherever they happen, anywhere in the world, including when our own country is involved. The historical record is very clear. The application of military force, which always kills indiscriminately, is never an effective response or deterrent. Brutal dictatorships must be overthrown, but not by external military aggression, instead by the aroused will and solidarity of the people committed to the establishment of peace and justice for all. I should say that I admire and like Barack Obama as a good, decent, intelligent, and charming man. His policy options, however, are shaped by a military-industrial complex that justifies its very existence through the manufacture of imaginary threats to our national security. Obama has fallen victim to the logic of massive military power that seeks always to justify its own existence. I am glad that he has now pulled back from the brink, that the pressures of people and congressional leaders, from whatever motives, have been reluctant to go along with this military option for the first time in decades in American policy dispute, and that the international community, again, for whatever motives, have expressed their reluctance. I am sorry, however, after watching last night, that Obama still maintains that the U.S. reserves the right and has the responsibility to apply its overwhelming military force in order to respond to human rights violations anywhere it sees fit. Human rights violations occur through the application of terrifying and indiscriminate military and police power to coerce others to do one's own will. Assad has done this. Many of his domestic opponents have done this. For the most powerful military power on earth to do this, does not oppose but only reinforces the logic of extreme violence, the logic of the justification of human rights violations. It does not interrupt the cycle of violence, it mirrors it and it exacerbates it. It also distracts the world from the violations it claims to oppose, deflecting attention from Assad's cruelty to American and European arrogance and violence. To say this is counterproductive is to vastly understate the folly of this policy and program. Until we call a halt to the manufacture of excuses for the use of military supremacy, we will never divert the machinery of war crimes to the welfare of the people from whom alone derives peace, justice, and indeed true national security.
Thank you, Dr. Jennings. Next, we will hear from Father Bob Bossi, who has worked on Middle Eastern issues for over 20 years while on the staff of the Eighth Day Center for Justice. He was part of the Gulf peace team that positioned itself between the opposing forces during the Gulf War in 1991. He co-founded Voices in the Wilderness, which sent numerous delegations to Iraq with medicines in violation of the then U.S.-UN economic sanctions. He was part of himself of 3 such delegations during which he witnessed grossly malformed newborn babies whose conditions experts attributed to depleted uranium munitions fired by the U.S. He is a veteran of the U.S. Air Force and worked for the military-industrial complex for 5 years. Father Bob Bossi.
Good morning. Well, President Obama has spoken, and he's going to postpone the attack on Syria, and he has asked the Congress to postpone their vote to give him permission, if you will, to attack Syria. And many people have breathed a long sigh of relief about this, but I think others of us are also quite fearful of what the implications of this are when we look back at what happened during the Bush administration's decision to attack Iraq, when they approached the Congress and they said they needed the will of the Congress to continue to force the Hussein regime to comply with international standards. So we are not persuaded that the danger is over. In fact, the danger very well might have been increased. For this reason, we continue to oppose, in the strongest possible terms, any U.S. presence and attack upon Syria. And we'd like to call all of our attention, including my own once again, to the fact that all of the major Christian churches have spoken out against any kind of attack by the United States, from the Pope to the U.S. bishops to the patriarchs in Syria and Iraq have spoken out against any attack, and from the most conservative to the most liberal churches, Christian churches in the United States. Unless we think that they are being simply naive, and that's what Christians and religious people say, allow me to suggest to you that the Christian community has been under severe attack in the Middle East, so they know what the consequences of some of the brutal dictatorships imply. And lest we think that they are naive, they're actually calling for much more vigorous diplomatic efforts to assuage, to stop any potential war and the use of chemical weapons. Let me remind us all also about the hypocrisy of the United States calling for some sort of international response about the use of chemical weapons in Syria. I'd like to call your attention to the use of the United States' use of nuclear weapons in Japan. I'd like to call your attention to the use of napalm in Vietnam. I'd like to call your attention to the use by the United States of depleted uranium munitions against Iraq in the 90s. By the way, when I was there in the 90s, following some of these attacks by depleted uranium, there were, as mentioned earlier in the introduction, that I saw many malformed children who medical experts attested that this was the cause of the depleted uranium. And lastly, I'd like to call attention to two other incidents by the United States and the use of economic sanctions against Iraq, which the United Nations, rather the World Health Organization said took the lives of as many as 500,000 children. And lastly, the use of the United States, the United States' use of white phosphorus munitions against Fallujah in Iraq in the 2000s. And as Neil, as one of the guys from the Sun-Times said this morning, I wonder if the children who die from those munitions know that they are legal or illegal. So, so the question is, if and when the United States attacks Syria, how many civilian deaths, how many children deaths will President Obama consider acceptable? He's claiming that he has looked at the pictures on television of all of the children who have died and all of the innocent civilians who have died from the chemical attacks. But I wonder if he will consider in his own mind and in his own heart the children and the innocent civilians that will die from any attack against Syria. So we, as a community and as a group, will continue our vigorous opposition to any U.S. attacks against Syria. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. I'd just like to underscore your last point. We, speaking for the World Can't Wait here in Chicago and around the country, and many other anti-war forces, we will stay tense to developments and be ready to vastly increase our protests in the days and weeks ahead, remembering all the feints and maneuvering the Bush regime went through to attack Iraq 10 years ago. I'm proud to introduce our next speaker, Kathy Kelly, who has lived in Iraq throughout the shock and awe bombings and was in Gaza, Lebanon, and the West Bank during various wars. She is a founding member of Voices for Creative Nonviolence, and she just returned a few days ago from Afghanistan. Kathy?
Good morning. Knowing as we do that democracy is based on information, it's so important that we convene together and keep trying to maintain our focus on truthful information with regard to United States war making in the world and what we hope is an averted strike against Syria. It seems to me that anybody who thinks that there is such a thing as a surgical strike is in need of a second opinion. Surgeons use careful tools and great skill in order to heal and save patients. Tomahawk missiles and cruise missiles launched against targets, whether they are civilian or military, ought never to be depicted as weaponry that degrades a military installation. It would be much more proper to say that those weapons puree the people who are there. And what's more, war isn't over when it's over. Bob Bossi and I were in Iraq during times of ferocious and horrible warfare. Believe me, that warfare doesn't end. Wars end for the people who are killed in the wars, but they don't end for those who are maimed, for those who are bereaved, for those who are tortured, for those who commit the torture. And so let us not be lulled into yet another warfare on the pretext that somehow the United States is engaging in a humanitarian war. There's no such thing as a humanitarian war. I was in Iraq during the 2003 shock and awe bombing, and repeatedly we would go to the emergency rooms and we would be at the bedsides of children whose bodies had been torn apart. We would be with people who could not escape the intense attacks, and the United States public had been told wrongfully that this was in order to save people in Iraq from a brutal dictator, that this was in order to save the world from Iraq's possession of weapons of mass destruction. And as has been pointed out, we have to be honest. The most appropriate words to say are two words: we're sorry, for our usage of Agent Orange, for our usage of napalm, for our usage of white phosphorus. When I was in Gaza next to a woman whose arm looked like a beehive. It was wrapped up in so many bandages. And you know, when white phosphorus is removed from somebody's skin, the surgeons themselves trying to pull out the white phosphorus have to move away from the operating table because their lungs fill up with the noxious fumes. As soon as the white phosphorus is exposed to oxygen, it starts to burn again. It's a hideous substance. It's a chemical weapon. And the United States has enabled other countries to use this and has used it in Fallujah. And so other countries all around the world understand the stockpiling of weaponry that the United States has amassed and that it has condoned amongst its allies. And our security is founded in extending a hand of friendship, in turning away from our addiction to warfare, and in beginning to set the world on another track, a track that recognizes that the greatest terrorism we face is the terror of what we're doing to our own environment in our destruction of our land, our water, our air, and that we need our resources to be directed toward building a better world, a safer world for next generations. And if President Obama wants to care for children in other parts of the world and in this country, he will live up to the call to put an end to war. He's in a pivotal position. He can do monumentally more than he is doing now, and we won't settle for less because we really do believe in the charge to care for the world's children.
Our next speaker is Mario Venegas, who is a chemist by training, having earned his PhD in that field from the University of London. As a young man, he was arrested in the aftermath of the US-backed coup that installed the Pinochet dictatorship in Chile 40 years ago today, the first 9/11. Himself a survivor of torture, Mario has served on the Client Advisory Council of the Kovler Center here in Chicago, of the Kovler Center for Survivors of Torture, and spoken before the Chicago City Council on that issue. He has worked with Amnesty International, School of the Americas Watch, and many, many other organizations and groups. Mario currently works actively with the Illinois Coalition Against Torture and the Chicago Coalition to Close Guantanamo, to name just a few. Mario.
Thank you, Jay. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here for this press conference. And thank you for the organization that is inviting us. As you can see here, World Can't Wait. First of all, let me tell you that, as Jay was saying, today is September 11. And we have two September 11th that I know until today. One was in 1973 in Chile, and the last one here in the United States, 2001. At this time that I'm looking at my watch, 40 years ago, planes, the Hawker Hunters of the Air Force in Chile, were bombing, striking the presidential palace in Santiago, Chile, where our President Salvador Allende was killed. From that very day, I started thinking about, first of all, thank that I survived. I spent 2.5 years in detention center, concentration camps, suffering torture and whatever kind of repression that you can imagine. But I survived, and I'm here to tell the world what happened in Chile 40 years ago. And I'm here to tell also what's going on today with the intentions of the United States to attack Syria. It's unbelievable that this country, our country today, because I am living here, it's exporting war all over the world. It's exporting torture all over the world. And today Syria is one of the targets that they have, because the industry of armament needs this, because the people of the 1% that we have described before in this country need this. But fortunately, the opposition to this intervention of the United States in Syria is the biggest wall that the armed industry that the U.S. government and their allies have been opposing to, because the enormous amount of people around the world is saying no. No more war, no more intervention of the U.S. What are we? We believe that we are the police that are patrolling the world, and whatever we don't like, then we have to intervene militarily. And we can have examples all over for many, many, many years. And this one has to stop. On last night's speech of President Obama, he was backing off a little bit about his position, although he's insisting on that. But he couldn't go through as he would have liked, because the opposition of the world, the opposition of the people inside the United States, the anti-war movement, has been acting. And whatever we have to say, Congress, President Obama, but the only people that can stop this is us, the people of the United States, acting very strong in this anti-war movement, don't allowing the U.S. to be anymore striking countries in defense of democracy, on, like in the base of humanitarian aspects. What kind of democracy we are talking about? We're talking about the democracy we have here in the U.S., like an example for the world, with all the repression that we have, with all the situation we are suffering because of those wars in Guantanamo, of the prisoners in California that have to be long time in hunger strike in order not to have isolation, confinement, or being treated. We're talking about that democracy in terms of the school and the education situation in this country, here in Chicago, what has happened with the school system. We're talking about right for workers, right for women. We're talking about free speech. We're talking about that kind of democracy that we are defending in other countries, something that we don't even have here. What about humanitarian aspects? Is that something that we respect here too, when violations of human rights here in this country are tremendous? I can go on and on with the things. But let me tell you that even today in Chile, where people are demonstrating in the streets, commemorating these 40 years, that nothing really strong has changed after 40 years. The economy is still the same. Poverty is even higher. Human rights is the arena where people have been discussing most of the things. And here in this country, we're discussing about war, but people are forgetting about what the issues I've said before. Poverty in this country, people that have not a home where to live. But we are concerned about humanitarian aspect from the government point of view. This is something that we have to change, and the only people that can change this is the people of the United States of America in supporting us everywhere in the world. And we are not someone that we can give examples outside to the world. We are not someone that's going to go there to defend democracy, when that are just lies. The intention of all these wars, we know that, is from an economic point of view. Oil is the most important thing today. And there we are, there we go, trying to find some kind of possibilities to intervene on these countries. So I'm coming from a country that we suffer this strike from the airplanes coming from the sky. The same thing we want to do today in Syria, killing probably thousands of innocent people. But we say that we're going there to defend people. No, we are going to attack that country and we're going to kill people. All those soldiers, all those members of the Air Force that are going to be acting there also have children here in this country. And they probably kiss goodbye to their kids, to their children when they went there. But they're saying goodbye to the children of their own, but killing children of other people. How can I understand this? So, again, the only people that can stop this is the world the anti-war movement. The only people that can do this. I don't believe really in Congress. I don't believe that Obama is going to change their mind. But yeah, there is still differences among themselves because of the serious situation that we are going to go in Syria. That will have more implications because tomorrow may be other countries in the region. Tomorrow may be even Iran, what we are looking for a long time to have some kind of intervention. And now, President Obama, because of the suggestion of Russia, has backed up a little bit. Let's see what happens. But we cannot stop our anti-war movement. We cannot stop denouncing. We cannot stop fighting for not to have this intervention. Because if we just keep our mouth shut, if we don't talk, they are going to have the way to go there. And we are the only ones that can stop this. Thank you so much for being here today.
I want to thank all of our speakers for so eloquently dissecting the crimes, as our banner says, the crimes of our government past, and reiterating our determination to do everything we can to stop the crime that is being prepared and for which the American people are being organized. We are expecting Candace Gorman any moment. She's in federal court right up the street. When she gets here, we'll have her explain more in depth the international legal perspective. She spent 18 months at The Hague at the International Criminal Court, which the U.S. has worked overtime to try to undermine and bully other countries into not participating in it. But at this point, we're open to questions if the media would like to ask of any of our speakers.
Just about the situation that we are in, and that is the development of the president sort of backing off on a strike and saying, let's go for the time being with Russia and talk about extracting these chemical weapons. Can someone speak to the most recent developments?
The question was if any of our speakers would like to address President Obama's statement last night that he will delay any action against Syria while pursuing diplomatic negotiations with Russia and other members of the Security Council. Does anybody? I'll defer to you.
Did you see this as a positive route, or at least for the time being? I mean, obviously, you're concerned about the strikes, but right now those are on hold.
It certainly is a positive development to know that the President of the United States in his speech last night said that they would delay strikes against Syria. It's reasonable to ask what prompted the President to take that action. And we believe that all across the United States there are people who are enormously war-weary. They do not want to be pulled into another war. And so the voice of public opinion functioned in a crucial way to persuade President Obama and his advisors that it wasn't wise to go forward with this warfare. And certainly also the notion that there were only two options, to do nothing or to attack, was never truthful. Of course there were other options for negotiation, for diplomacy, for being able to work on a weapons embargo, for being able to insist that the countries that are fighting proxy wars in Syria come to a conference, to a negotiating table. This is the work of diplomacy and negotiation. But we also want to reiterate that there is such a thing as Syrian civil society, and that Syrian civil society ought best to determine the future of Syria. And that certainly for the United States to have engaged in any act of war against Syria would have been illegal and would have been a war crime. And so we now are at a point where it's no time to let this issue fall off of the front pages of our newspapers, of our media, or of our own consciousness. It's a crucial time for people to pay attention and not to allow a kind of a leakage or distraction to take our attention away from the cares and concerns of people in Syria and the responsibility of people in the United States to not only restrain the warmongers and the war profiteers from bringing us into yet another war. But I'll go further and say, look to the possibilities that are indicated in this outpouring of public outcry resisting further warfare to suggest that maybe, just maybe, we'll move toward a point, a very rational point in our world when we can abolish warfare. The United Nations was founded to eliminate the scourge of warfare. And on this September 11th, let us behold that as a possibility, as a call that could be a salvation, really, for future generations.
And I'd just like to say as well that there are sometimes offers that cannot be accepted. And if the United States is going to demand that Syria not only be monitored, but actually turn over all of its chemical weapons, I think they could be easily setting up a situation to fail. At the same time that Obama linked that to alleged Iranian attempts to develop nuclear capacity, the whole world knows that Israel actually possesses nuclear weapons. It was a kind of an unspoken bargain that Israel could have their nuclear weapons and Syria could have his chemical weapons. Israel has never signed the Non-Proliferation Pact. Israel has never signed it. Iran has. And yet the U.S. is threatening Syria and Iran. So I think we should stay both very alert, as all of our speakers have, and very skeptical and inquire deeply of what exactly is being offered, what exactly the U.S. is demanding of Syria before we start celebrating any backing down. President Obama continued to insist on his resolution passing that would give him immediate authorization for 60 days of bombing of Syria, 60 days of bombing. And we in World Can't Wait have said from the beginning, whether Congress approves or not, it remains illegal under international law, which is the highest law of this land and the world. So whether it's authorized or not, it remains illegal and inhumane.
It is a positive development for the people who might have died in Syria today. The difficulty is the word delay. This action is, for the moment, only delayed. The U.S. has not renounced, President Obama has not renounced the use of overwhelming military power to express its own moral outrage. Therefore, so long as the U.S. and its government does not renounce the use of this power, this criminal act, until that happens, the world remains in danger. It remains in danger not from Assad, but from the United States.
Another question? They can be for everyone or a particular individual on the panel. It's open.
Can I just reiterate?
Sure.
Allow me to reiterate what I said before, and I was a little bit awkward in saying it. I think that most of us are pleased that there won't be any deaths today or tomorrow as a result of U.S. attack on Syria. But I think that there's a real possibility that it could increase the danger, the delay. And that is to say that the United States now is claiming, Obama is now claiming, because he has threatened to attack Syria, now they are backing off. And if there's any hesitancy, as I heard last night on television, that supposedly Russia was being obstructionist in the Security Council already, if there was any hesitancy on the part of Russia and Syria to turn over the weapons, if you will, there's a great likelihood that the Obama administration will then go back to the Congress with the demand that they acquiesce to his use of military force to maintain the pressure on Syria, much like, as I said earlier, the Bush administration did in its attack on Iraq in 2003. So I believe that there is a greater danger in some respects by the decision by the United States to put on hold the vote and the attack against Syria.
I think really, as I said before, that today is the time for the anti-war movement to demand the unilateral disarmament of the Pentagon. We are not going to ask for disarmament of some other country. We are not able here in our own country to do that. The United States has the world's largest stockpiles of conventional, nuclear, and chemical weapons. And here we are trying to intervene in another country because of their chemical weapons. And we have all those here in our own country, and we have used them in the past. So it's a kind of cynicism of the whole thing when we go to say that for humanitarian, to defend democracy, when it's our own country, the Pentagon is the one that has to call for disarming themselves and not trying to put it in other countries. Probably those are weapons that we have even sold them in the past, that we have been given them in the past. But now, here we are, trying to go with that excuse, even more, I would say, with that lie of we need to intervene there. The same that we heard before. Before we intervened in Iraq, was the same situation. We're happening now again. And let me go back when I said about the situation in Chile. 40 years ago, when those airplanes struck under the presidential palace, was something there decided in between the Chilean bourgeoisie, the army, and the United States of America. At that time, Henry Kissinger and Richard Nixon as the president were the ones that decided that we have to stop this situation in Chile. And we have to bomb the palace, we have to kill the president, and kill everyone who opposes. We have more than 3,500 people that were disappeared. Thousands of thousands that were killed. And we wanted to go through again and see this situation in another country where the United States of America decided who has to live and who has to die by the military action they're going to have. That's why I'm saying no more. We have to stop this. And the only one that had to stop it is the people of the United States of America. With all this movement, with all this press conference, with all documents that we can read or we can write and send to the media. Stop this once and forever. We cannot allow the government. Yeah, we originally support President Obama with all the changes that he said he was going to make. Unfortunately, nothing has changed. Moreover, he is the one today, the leader trying to attack Syria, when most of his campaign was based, not war, on an anti-war campaign. And here we are, having him saying, let's go, let's attack there, and no matter what the opposition he has had. Yes, it has been delayed, but we have to be careful, we have to be watching, because their intention has not died. They will continue. If it's not this country, tomorrow will be another. So we have to keep moving, we have to keep acting, not just listening, acting with this anti-war movement. Thank you.
Thank you. I couldn't agree more with our speakers. One point that President Obama made in his speech last night that has not gotten much attention was he stated that he has ordered the military to maintain their positions. That means the warships are off the coast of Syria. That means the cruise missiles, the Tomahawk missiles, are pointed at the Syrian people right now as we speak. That means the B-52 bombers that were also announced to be part of this campaign. B-52 bombers carry a huge payload. That is not, as Kathy explained, that is not surgical. That is pulverization, and it is people who will die. So no, we are not going to step back. We will maintain it, and step up our protests as this danger becomes more and more clear. Other questions? We're happy to take questions to individuals or the group. Thank you all for coming. I hope you will share this with your audience.